Hi, I'm Charles Jeffries, and I teach psychology at Seattle Central and Green River Colleges. And this segment today is going to focus on methods of research. In other words, how psychologists get their information. You ever somebody tell you something and you say, and you're not sure where it came from or if it's true or not? What do you usually ask them? Well, how do you know this? Or where does this come from? Or how did you get this information? And that's what research is all about. Looking at how psychologists get the information. One of the oldest methods of research is observation. Observation. You want to know what someone's doing, you watch them. You know how a certain animal acts, you watch them. Okay. And the key with observation is that, and you have two types of observation. You have a controlled observation, which is another word for experiment, and you have naturalistic observation, which you're going and observing something in real life. Let's talk about controlled observation first. Experiment. What is experiment? You start with a hypothesis, you test a hypothesis, you compare the hypothesis with the original results. If the hypothesis and results are consistent, then no problem. If the hypothesis and results are different, then you have to redo the experiment and look at what you did wrong. Also with the experiments, you work in groups. You have two types of groups. You have experimental group and you have control group. Experimental group, that's the one that gets the treatment. Okay, the control group is the one that gets nothing or is neutral. For instance, the medical profession, they will use, whenever a new drug comes out, they'll usually give one group the actual drug and they'll give another group a sugar pill that are known as a placebo. And at the end of the experiment, they compare the result and see what happens there. Okay. Also, when you think about within the context of experiments, you're also looking at working variables. You have two types of variables, independent variables and you have dependent variables. Independent variables, those are factors in the experiment that you're manipulating, whereas dependent variables are your results. Example, CREST test. Back in the 1960s, they did an experiment where they found that children who used Crest had less cavities than children who used regular toothpaste. Okay, so what they did, they gave one group of children the Crest with their testing, another group regular toothpaste. Okay, the kids who got the regular toothpaste, that would be your control group, where the kids who got the Crest would be the experimental group. The beauty of experiment is also its curse. I mean, the beauty of experiment, you're under control condition, you rule out all these extraneous variables, and you're looking at one or two specific behavior patterns. The problem is in real life, you can't always get rid of those variables. Those variables are there. The wind is blowing, the cars are going by, and so those variables can influence. That's why social psychologists use the term mundane realism. Mundane realism. In other words, how well do these results in this psychological experiment carry over to real life? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But the problem with experiments is artificial. Okay, and that goes back to how it relates to mundane realism. In a laboratory, people oftentimes do things in a psychological laboratory that they won't do in real life. Okay, they might do some things in real life that they may not do in a psychological experiment. And that's why the understanding mundane realism is really important. Next method of research we talked about is naturalistic observation. Going in one's real life environment, observing the in vivo, observing as they live their lives. Okay, anthropologists, animal psychologists, they do it on a regular basis. There's a series that came out a few years ago on PBS called Life on the Serengeti. Serengeti is a grassland or savanna on the Kenya-Tanzania border. Okay, you have elephants, lions, zebras, giraffes, all living the way they've been living. And what they did each week, they took an animal in that area and watched them each episode. They'd watch them from the time they're babies until the time they're adults. Okay, and basically that's what we're talking about. And so it's really amazing when you stop and think about it. You can get a lot of rich and colorful data, okay, from naturalist observation. Also, naturalist observation give you some ideas on what type of research you want to do in the future. Okay, I said anthropologists use a naturalist observation. A lot of animal psychologists use natural observation. And one of the key issues you want to look at or think about when you do naturalistic observation is that basically you want to, as they said in Star Trek, the prime directive, don't interfere. No, you observe and you don't interfere. Okay, for instance, one scene where some lions, when they're basically on the elephants, a baby elephant wandered a little too far away from the mother, and lions came along, ate it right there on the screen, just ate it up, and they're just filming the whole time. All the guy had to do is blow his horn, beep beep beep, and the lions would run, but they didn't. They filmed it, and that's the key of natural. You can't interfere. You have to observe. Okay, otherwise it won't be natural. Okay, one of the problems in naturalist scholarship, any type of observation, is observer bias, using one's own values to judge or interpret someone else's cultural behavior. That's really difficult. It's really difficult to look at in terms of Westerners, because Westerners come in with our lens. We're going to observe these primitives. And as we observe these primitives, the assumption that society is evolving from a hunters and gatherers society to an agrarian society to a postmodern society like we live in. Well, that's an arrogant assumption. And if you go in with those type of assumptions that these are primitives, then it's going to taint the quality of your research. Margaret Mead, she's considered one of the greatest anthropologists that ever lived. And she's famous for a book she wrote called Coming of Age in Samoa. Well, since she wrote a book, a lot of Samoans went to college and read Margaret. They don't like her. They think that she totally misrepresented their culture. I don't know if they did or not, but the point of the matter is, it's a possibility. Once again, because Westerners, we go in to other cultures with certain assumptions, and we may not really understand what we're observing. Think about it now. Let's suppose someone's never been exposed to Christianity, and you go to church on Communion Day. You use tasteless crackers, and these are tasteless crackers. They tell you what the body of Christ. You drink the grape juice or wine, and what they give you, and they say that's the blood of Christ. Eating flesh and drinking blood, that's cannibalism and vampirism. This is a sick culture. Someone who's never been exposed to Christianity sees something like this here, that would say, wow, that's really sick. Even though to someone who's a part of that culture, it represents a beautiful ceremony. But once again, that's where observer bias comes. Someone who doesn't really understand a culture, go and observe, and they come out with misinterpretations of what they saw. Another method of research is correlation. A correlation is a statement about a relationship between two events. A statement about a relationship. As one increases, the other increases. Or as one increases, the other decreases. Okay, positive correlation, you have a graph, goes up like that. Negative correlation, you have a graph, the line will go down like that. Zero correlation, you can't draw a straight line through it. Okay, one of the most talked about correlations came out in the 1960s, 1950s, where master surgeons in general declared that there's a direct correlation between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. You know what the tobacco industry said? That didn't prove anything. That's just a correlation. You know, they're right. That's a big mistake a lot of people do. They assume that just because two things occur together, it's a cause effect. Okay, now we know cigarette smoking causes lung cancer, not from the correlation, but from observing cigarette smokers over the years and also through research animals. So correlation, whenever you see a correlation, the first thing you want to do is say, rather than saying there's a cause effect, say further research is needed. Okay, a perfect correlation is 1.0, okay, and no correlation be 0. So 0 to 1.0, positive 1.0 or negative 1.0. Okay, so X increases, Y increases also. That would be a positive correlation. On the other hand, if X increases, Y decreases. That would be a negative correlation. Okay. Next type of research I want to talk about are surveys. The beauty of surveys is you get a lot of information quickly. A lot of information. You probably do these internet surveys. How do you feel about this? Do you like this product? Who are you going to vote for? The polls, this type of survey. Okay. And the one problem with surveys is that sample. We always talk about sample. Where do you get the sample? Was it a random sample or was it a convenient sample? A lot of your research, particularly on surveys, are convenient samples. In other words, they basically test the people or question the people who they can get to. Okay, and that's why you want to be very careful when you read research around surveys. Who did the survey? That's the first thing you want to ask. In other words, if Fox News did the survey, it may not necessarily be objective because only a certain type of people watch Fox News. Okay, same as CNN did a survey. Once again, it's not a true representation of the population because only certain people read CNN. Most people are college educated, tend to be read more and more politically aware than other folks. Okay, the assumption is a random sample. In other words, you put everybody who's watching this name in a hat, shake that hat up, and pull one name out. That would be a random drawing. Okay, like I said, most samples are convenience samples. Another method of research are interviews, better known as self-reports. And interviews is, I ask a question, you give an answer. Okay, how do you feel today? Oh, I'm fine, thank you. That's an interview. Okay, the key to interviews is that you want to set your interview up in such a way to where the person will give you an honest answer. Okay, the problem with interviews is people lie. How you feeling? Oh, I feel fine. Well, you had someone telling you on the way to work, you got a ticket, your dog died, you had a fight with your spouse, but you said you lied. Okay, so the key is you want to set that interview up in such a way to where you get an honest answer. Okay, non-judgmental. Don't make the person you're interviewing think you're judging them. Okay, or they're going to tell you something. Also, how you word the question also makes a difference in terms of how often do you pick your nose versus do you pick your nose. In other words, do you implies a judgment call. How often the assumption is everybody does it. Okay, another survey is a questionnaire. Questionnaire is just an interview on paper. The beauty of questionnaire, nobody knows it's you. You fill out that questionnaire, put in the box, send off, nobody knows it's you. The problem with the questionnaire is non-participation rate. If you send out 100 questionnaires, count yourself lucky if you get 8 back. Okay, and the next question is what type of person is willing to fill that questionnaire out? Okay, and so that's the key. And also another factor of questionnaire, you want to have the same people, the same questions, the same order, the same way. Otherwise, if you change this a little, it could alter the way it's done.